Okay, it's 5 past, so let's start. Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to a joint OWASP London, OWASP Suffolk online chapter meeting. We haven't had a chapter meeting for a while. Of course, this was due to coronavirus situation. I think for now, all OWASP events are going to be online, including chapter meetings and big global events. I'm going to present about global events a little bit later. So today's event is brought to you to two chapters, London and Suffolk. Here's a quick agenda. After this greeting and updates from OWASP on the upcoming events, we're going to have a talk on the cloud migration and security implications, presented by Jason Sewell. Then we're going to take a short break and allow for some networking. Also, please make sure you ask questions using YouTube Q&A system. We will relay them to the presenter. And after that, we're going to have a panel, Meet the Pentesters. Everything you ever wanted to ask what pentesters do, how they do it. We have three pentesters tonight. We've got Casey, Ivano, and Nicholas, who are going to share their wisdom, everything about pen testing. Please keep your questions coming on YouTube. Quickly about us. So OWASP London chapter has three chapter leaders. Sam Stepanian. We have Andra online as well. Sharif is currently on holiday, so hopefully he will join us for the next event. OWASP London chapter is on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is OWASP London, and when you're tweeting about our events, please use hashtag OWASP London. OWASP Suffolk chapter leaders are Wojciech Cichon and Abhinav Sechpal. And you can see their Twitter handles on the screen right now. Again, OWASP Suffolk Twitter handle and their hashtag is on the screen right now. Again, a quick reminder about OWASP Community, that we are a worldwide free and open community focused on improving security of software. And our mission is to make application security visible so that people and organizations can make informed decisions about application security risks. A reminder that it's all for free. Everyone is free to participate in OWASP, and all our material is available under free and open software license. And all OWASP events, except global conferences, are free to attend by both members and non-members of OWASP, and can be attended by anyone who is interested in application security in general. OWASP Foundation itself is a global not-for-profit charitable foundation. We are a vendor-neutral community. We are supported by vendors, but we are vendor-neutral. We provide free tools, guidance, documentations. Meetings are free to attend. Again, if this was a real live event, there would be free drinks and pizza. Somebody asked, where's the pizza? Unfortunately, not tonight. But hopefully in the future events, we'll arrange something like a voucher for a pizza for attendees. And all our events are usually 2-hour seminars. Usual format is about 2 main talks. OWASP is worldwide. We are growing. Currently, there are 207 chapters in 56 countries. And we have quite a lot of chapters in the UK. There is a membership, but you don't need to be a member to participate, but you're encouraged to become a member. More about membership a little bit later when we talk about elections. OWASP is not only chapters, it's projects. We're currently counting 189 projects, including 20 flagships. I think everyone is aware of OWASP Top 10, but we have 20 other big flagship projects, including OWASP Mass, Application Security Verification Standard, Defect Dojo, Juice Shop, Mobile Top 10, Security Knowledge Framework, Security Shepherd. These are just the ones to mention that you can see on the screen, but the total number of projects is currently 189. They are all open source and open to everyone to contribute and, of course, use in their organizations. Okay, upcoming events. So we have a big event coming up, which is OWASP Global AppSec 2020. This conference was originally supposed to be in person in San Francisco. Unfortunately, due to coronavirus restrictions, it cannot be run in person, but it is being run online, and it's actually already open because it is in the format of a mixture of on-demand talks and keynotes. Registration is now open. You can go and register at virtual.globalappsec.org. If you're an OWASP member, you will get a discount. This is a paid conference, I have to say, with training courses included as well. But because this is an online event, there is actually quite a discount compared with the usual in-person events. So I urge you all to go and check it out. There's some awesome keynote speakers and lots of good sessions and training available there. Next event coming up is going to be OWASP UK-wide Capture the Flag. It's going to run throughout the whole week, kicking off on October 26th. We're going to announce all the details a bit later, so please make sure you do follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and all the usual social networks. Also on the mailing lists and on our website, there will be an announcement, details of the coming up Capture the Flag tournament. It's going to be a bit interesting with the prizes because, as many of you know, we usually run these events in person, and the main reason for that is that we usually give out physical prizes, and yeah, with coronavirus, a prize giving ceremony is not going to happen, but instead we will figure out how to use vouchers, for example, instead of physical prizes, so you can choose a prize yourself. Another big event is going to be AppSec Israel 2020. It's a regional event. It's going to be online. It is on October 28th. I believe registration is due to be open very soon. So please make sure you Google AppSec Israel so you could register for that event. And the next event after that, big regional event, is going to be AppSec Morocco and Africa 2020. And that's going to be in November. For those of you who were waiting for the OWASP Global AppSec in Dublin, which was supposed to be this year, as you know, it's currently moved to February, and we're just waiting some updates to understand whether we will be able to run this event at all or not. Of course, there are coronavirus restrictions all over the world at the moment. I think in some countries like New Zealand and Australia, they're a bit relaxed. So OWASP Global Board, I think, might allow some events to happen in person in those countries. But generally, the current restriction is that no chapter should be running an in-person event. We are all online. We're all virtual from now on. Another big announcement, which is happening currently, is OWASP board elections. We have 4 candidates, Bill Corey, Martin Knobloch, Jubin Jabari, and Haral Tsitsipas. You can Google OWASP board elections and check out the candidate pages with their biographies and a short video message that they recorded when they answer the questions about their vision for the future of OWASP if they get elected. There's a timeline as well for the voting. Sorry, the dates are in American format because OWASP is a US-based charity. So basically, 15th of October, the voting will open. It will go out to everyone who is a paid OWASP member. So if you're not an OWASP member and you want to vote for a future director, the one that you like, please make sure you do get your OWASP membership sorted out by then. There will be 2 reminders going for the voting. It will close on 30th of October, and then the results will be shared on 1st of November. So OWASP board elections is a very important thing which is happening, and it is your chance to shape the direction and future of OWASP. We're a free and open community, and I think it's quite important that our governance is supported by you. Reminder that we're all volunteers, and none of us is getting paid for being an OWASP. You need to make sure that if you want to become a member to vote, you can get a membership, which is currently $50 per year, which roughly turns into 36 pounds, British pounds per year for students, and for some countries there are discounts. So student membership, I believe, is only $20 at the moment. As I mentioned before, we are a vendor neutral community, but we are supported by vendors, by sponsors. You can see the logos of our corporate sponsors. And if you would like, if you work for an organization, if you'd like to sponsor OWASP and get your logo on the screen, please do get in touch. We will help you to become a corporate member. There are also a few organizations who are premium members. So these are the companies which donate at least $20,000 per year. You can see them on the screen. We also had some companies recently joining OWASP as corporate members. And we have our chapter sponsors as well. So these are the current OWASP London and OWASP Suffolk chapter sponsors. I'd like to say that OCAMSEC is the organization from Pentesters who are going to be on today's panel are coming from, is a sponsor of both OWASP London and OWASP Suffolk. And OWASP Suffolk also has a sponsor, which is Ipswich Waterfront Innovation Centre. So when coronavirus pandemic is over and we're all going to be back meeting in person, I believe that is the venue for the most of the OWASP Suffolk events. So I think it's time for me to introduce Jason Sewell, who is an OWASP Hawaii chapter leader. So it is very early morning in Hawaii at the moment. So Jason has kindly agreed to join us and speak to us about the cloud security issue and what you need to do and pay attention to when you migrate your applications to the cloud. So I'm going to stop my presentation now and hand it over to Jason.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Sam. Appreciate the introduction, and just want to say thank you to the OWASP Suffolk and London chapters for having us today. Really appreciate it. So today I'll be talking a bit about cloud migration for companies that are kind of have on-prem environments or thinking about moving to the cloud, and some of the security implications and things to look out for as you enter new environments. So the title of this talk is the Cloud Migration Playbook, Part 1, because this could go on and on and on. The cloud is a complex environment, but we'll start simple. And a little bit about me. My name is Jason Sewell. I'm one of the senior security engineers at OCAMSEC. I had kind of an interesting journey into InfoSec, as I actually have a background as a web developer, kind of got brought into DevOps. And more recently, I started out as a penetration tester working with OCAMSEC. And so coming to understand a lot of my past failures, in the area of security, kind of brought me into security. Have a couple AWS certifications. I've been doing AWS development for quite some time. Real quick, is my presentation full screen? It looks a little bit small. Can somebody verify?
It is a bit small.
Okay, okay. I wasn't sure if it was just me. Let me stop this tab and reshare. So, how's that? Is that better?
Much better now.
Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so anyways, so I've been, this talk specifically kind of focused on AWS cloud. A lot of these principles in, at the base level do apply to, Azure, GCP, Alibaba, what have you. So the ideal kind of person who should be, interested in this talk is really, a CISO, technical director, engineering manager, or anybody that is just an advocate for security that will have some kind of, responsibility for migrating to the cloud and kind of learning more about that environment. So, potentially you want to lift and shift existing on-prem applications and move them to the cloud. You want to understand kind of what this new attack surface is, specifically on, AWS resources, and you just want to validate that, that you're kind of going about this the right way. And really, what's the outcome? What's the ideal outcome of this? What do we accomplish? And so basically, to put it in a nutshell, is that we don't want you to become a headline, right? So there's been, kind of endless stories about, data breaches and what have you on the cloud. So so it's better to, kind of look ahead rather than setting an example. So that's kind of the, the problem with kind of being in a leader position is sometimes, you lead in ways that were unintended. So if you haven't kind of been in the cloud, this might be new. If you have, then you've probably heard of this. But a lot of the cloud vendors, they have what's called this shared security model, where they take responsibility for security of the cloud, and you as a customer of their service take on the responsibility for security in the cloud. So what that means is they will harden the data center, physical networks, things like that, access to those resources in the different regions, make sure it's highly available and redundant, and all of that good stuff that's very hard to do. And basically, they let you deploy, virtual networks and applications, and use all their services on top of that. And they essentially say, as you're doing that, security is your job, not our job anymore. And this is kind of the hard part of where people begin, is even understanding where that perimeter is. And essentially what this comes down to is their job's already done. Yours is not. Okay. So, and is it really shared? Is the responsibility actually shared? According to them, it's all your fault. So, through 2025, Gartner projects that almost 100% of cloud security failures will be your fault, aka our fault, my fault, and not theirs. So that's a lot of pressure, obviously. But it's kind of true, is that you are a steward of your own environment and a caretaker of that. So what's the main thing you have to worry about when you're kind of migrating to the cloud? And really, the answer to that question comes down to misconfigurations. Is that you're kind of getting into this software-defined networks. I mean, software-defined everything, right? You're no longer dealing with physical assets and physical equipment, and the way that your existing employees maybe know how to do things, the same things that are in theory, do them in a new environment. So everything's software defined and everything has a configuration, and therefore a lot of the problems that occur are due to misconfigurations. Couple more stats on top of that is that basically from just from 2018 to 2019, most of the data breaches that occurred were due to misconfiguration. It rose by 80%. And the cost, cybersecurity, it's all about kind of, risk and, how much risk tolerance do you have? And these things get very expensive if not done correctly, and a data breach does happen. And in addition to that, as it relates to this talk specifically, statistically, the number of companies that have suffered a data breach are the companies that are doing migrations. They've been on-prem companies. They're very good at what they've done for a long time, and they're moving to a new environment, and that's it's a lot. It's a lot to learn. It's a lot to manage and what have you. So in comparison to newer startup companies that started in the cloud and maybe have people that most of their experiences in the cloud, there is kind of a disparity there. So that's kind of the focus of this talk specifically. And so that kind of leads us to know your defaults as you're starting out in the cloud. Really get to know the defaults. A lot of the demos out there, I'm sure you've seen this in other areas of IT and software development. The demos are meant to, they're marketing tools to get people onboarded to the platform easily. They're not comprehensive security solutions, but a lot of times you'll see kind of like demos and documentation out there basically repeated, and it's not accounting for hardening of those resources and all of kind of the security considerations that go into production environments. So so a good place to start is just know what the defaults are and kind of do some threat modeling around that and learn where to harden out of the gate, and it'll save a lot of pain and frustration down the line. And the deeper you get into the cloud, the more complex it becomes. So this is by no means an easy task to do, but it's a good kind of baseline, rule to follow. So very much easier said than done. So kind of, I think this is a common sentiment is, people as they're kind of looking at the cloud, especially if you've been in IT for a long time, you're like, yeah, it's the same stuff, right? I get it. It's servers, it's networks, it's applications, it's firewalls. I get it. I just need to, kind of move it over there. And that's kind of true, right? But but not completely. So as you move into this complex environment, I think if anybody's gone into AWS and isn't familiar with AWS, the first thing you see is their kind of like drop-down menu that has basically, I think it's up to 10,000 items in a drop-down menu, roughly. And that can be pretty intimidating, right? So where do you need to focus first? If you're performing lift and shift, you're performing the cloud migration, you're deploying new services, what have you, it really comes down to the principles of identity, data storage, networking, and compute. And that sounds obvious. There's a lot of, again, complexity is kind of the key word here. There's a lot of complexity that goes into that. And but it definitely helps to not get distracted by all the bells and whistles of the cloud and focus on the fundamentals. And if you focus in these areas, that it's a good place to start. So starting off, IAM. So if you've had any experience with IAM in AWS, you probably have less hair than you did prior to going into that environment. You may have heard kind of the catchphrase, quote unquote, identity is the new perimeter. But really what it comes down to is IAM and cloud permissions in general are very different and very complicated and very, what the heck is this? And so it's very hard to manage. In AWS alone, there's over 6,000. I think this number is dated. I think I saw recently that it's over 7,000 now, and this statistic isn't from that long ago. So as they roll out new services, a bunch of new permissions come with it. You don't need to understand 6,000 permissions. It's just applied to the services that you use. Oops. But it's growing. One of the hardest things is to visualize your permission boundaries and really understand what where your vulnerabilities and where what we call in Hawaii, where your pukas, where the holes are in your infrastructure. And so because you can't see that, you can't visualize it, it's new, it's very hard, and lots of problems can occur there. And most of the attacks that we'll go over in the rest of this presentation, a lot of them have IAM misconfigurations as part of the attack or part of the weakness that's being exploited. So IAM is crucial, and we could do hours of talks just on IAM alone, but that's extremely boring, and everybody's eyes would be bleeding by the end of this presentation. So, but definitely focus on it. Make it a focus as you're migrating to the cloud. So kind of the format of what I'll go through in these key areas is some of the attacks. You know, we are an offensive security company, and so by first looking at the attacks, we can look at some of the defenses that you could put in place. But this is essentially what your attackers and adversaries are trying to do, and so it's good to you can threat model around these basic key areas. So as it relates to IAM, account takeover and credential theft are really the the main points that attackers will be looking for. Is that if you can gain access to the web console, right? AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, they're all web accessible login web applications. So if somebody is able to brute force or perform, do password spraying, social engineering, what have you, if somebody gets access to that web console with high level administrator privileges, that's pretty much game over. And yeah, and in a lot of companies, I think, or a lot of companies that we've seen are very susceptible should an account takeover occur. Let me put it that way. The other is credential theft. Is that the way the cloud has been created? It's very accessible to developers. Everybody gets access keys. With those access keys come permissions, and so there's a lot of things to do. If somebody could get a foothold in one of those areas, is getting API keys that have excessive permissions, or getting access to the web console. And so just kind of give you a visual of things that things to look out for. So I want everybody to say, repeat after me. I am not going to do this, okay? So, but have that in the back of your mind. Like, I am not going to do this. It's probably the tackiest wordplay on I am I could come up with. But if you kind of see here, in the top left, this policy that I'm showing, because the environment is complex and people don't understand it and potentially don't have the time and are just trying to kind of get things to work, you'll see these allow asterisk is that or any asterisks. Asterisks are bad. Just remember that, like, asterisks are bad, because what's that saying is I don't understand the permissions to that my application or this user or this group actually need, but I'm having problems in getting things to work. So I'm just going to basically open the front door completely. And so this is something that we see often. Really, be mindful of that. There's tools that can kind of check for these things now, which is great. We didn't have that a couple years ago. Kind of off to the right, you'll see, groups of users is a very common concept, but we'll see things like this where the admins of this group, or say they have an admins group, right, that has the show policy that I just showed, that gives all access to all resources to anybody in this group. And you'll see things like this. We've seen stuff like this where contractors are part of this group. A third-party company has basically 100% administrator control of your entire organization, past employees, or just the number of people in the group, period. You should not have many people that can do anything that they want in that environment unchecked, right? And then kind of off to the right, what you'll see here is that somebody has access to the web console. They don't have MFA enforced, and they also have access keys. So this one person is, should a compromise happen in any any of those different ways we talked about, a lot of damage can be done. Is that there's multiple kind of attack vectors when IAM permissions are excessively granted. So real quick, some of the defenses. I'm kind of blowing through these. You know, I could really go into depth into a lot of these, but you know, this is kind of a primer and a part one. So look forward to future deep dives into some of these areas. But some of the things you could do, really, I mean, kind of common and not the hardest things to do anymore. You know, single sign-on is a good way to kind of tie access to your organization, you know, your web consoles to things like Active Directory, things that you're used to. MFA enforcement, this is so key. Like most of what I just discussed in the attacks, attack surface can be disabled with MFA enforcement. So, you know, but we still see people, and there's still a lot of statistics that MFA is still widely not enforced across organizations. The root user, when you create a user, delete their API keys, that account should have, you know, no console line or CLI access or, you know, CI, CD kind of access. Rotate your user keys, implement role-based access control, really enforce least privilege. It's, you know, again, these are kind of golden rules that we've lived with for a long time. Just because you go to the cloud doesn't mean, you know, that they should go away. So, but again, it's hard. But use conditional policies. Don't use wildcards, and don't use the administrator access permission that AWS gives you. It's basically God mode, and unless you, generally you don't want to give God mode to anybody. And yeah, and then also you have the ability to disable regions that you're not using. If you're in the UK, you know, and all your users are primarily there, then disable, you know, North America and Asia and all those other regions, and then people can't kind of sneak in and go undetected into other regions. Okay, moving on, data storage. So there's a lot of, this is a big area. S3, specifically to AWS, has dominated the headlines. So you know, it's your favorite data breach news source. So that I'll kind of highlight S3, but there's RDS, you know, your relational databases, DynamoDB, so some of these kind of newer cloud native database technologies, Elasticache, SQS, message queues, and much more. There's you know, the cloud's primarily built around data, and that's where they make a lot of their money. So some of the attacks that you will see on data sources and specifically buckets, you know, as it relates to buckets. In Azure and GCP, they have their own concept of buckets. It's file storage that you can make, you know, globally, literally globally readable and writable. And so those are obviously a you know, prime target. Data exfiltration, because of what's stored in these things, resource tampering, and payload staging to if they have a foothold in that environment. So we'll kind of take a look at some of the things that you've probably heard of in terms of, you know, these attack vectors. So bucket enumeration is that it's, you know, again, all these buckets have public URLs. It's very easy to guess what these URLs are with, you know, word lists and brute force methods. And so if you haven't heard, there's a site called Grey Hat Warfare. They've essentially gone and just scanned S3 buckets only. This is just AWS for years now, and they've basically compromised almost 300,000 publicly readable buckets and exfiltrated 3.639 billion files out of those buckets. That's a lot. Some of these are public by design. You know, they're serving static websites, what have you. But a lot of these were not meant to be public, and this is, you're looking at data breaches and the scope of data breaches that have happened over the last several years, and it's publicly accessible. There's, you know, Twilio. So resource tampering. This is something that was in the news recently that that you may be familiar with. What this is, you know, one of the good things about S3, it's globally redundant, it's highly available. You know, all of the buzzwords that developers love and say that they have to have. I've been there. I'm I'm not criticizing. I've been that person. I was a developer, and so you get benefits. But what Twilio had was they had public write access to a bucket, and what they did with that bucket was they served JavaScript to their end users as part of like a CDN, right? And it improved the performance of their application. However, that the bucket had write access. So what somebody did was they downloaded the legitimate file, JavaScript file. They modified it and put in some tracking code, and then they uploaded it back to the bucket. And so the application the user application has no idea that file has been modified. There's nothing in place to detect that happened, and it was very easy. I mean, that's a basic attack, but Twilio has quite a large user base, so a lot of people were immediately affected by that. And again, it's IAM. That would have been easily avoided with IAM. So data exfiltration. This is my favorite slide. This is an actual Dow Jones had a data breach for 2.4 million records with lots of PII in there, and literally this is the diagram. You had an Elastic search service with 2.4 million records that was open and accessible to the entire internet with no authentication. So it doesn't get any easier than this, and but that was a bad one. And also for context on this one, this was done by a contractor, and that is often the case when people have tight deadlines and need to expand their teams rapidly, and they need subject matter experts to come in because it's a new environment. So again, be careful and make sure that you have controls in place that even if you're bringing in people, that they're subject to peer review and things like that, because this, like I said, it doesn't get any easier than this. Okay, so some of the defenses that you can put in place for, again, S3, AWS specifically, they're rolling out new controls, and they actually rolled out 3 new controls this week. So again, they are doing their responsibility somewhat and actually, helping the community by adapting quickly. And when AWS or when the cloud implements new security control, it's implemented for all of their customers, and that's one of the cool things about the cloud, but it's hard to keep track of. So turn on block public access as a default. That will prevent a lot of these things, but that didn't used to be there. So that's a new control that AWS helped out with. Really look at your bucket policies and your access policies and understand them at a very high level. If you can understand bucket policies in depth, that's a very good place to start. So for RDS, Elastic Cache, any of the data sources, don't turn on public access. You wouldn't do that in your data center, so don't do it in the cloud. And make sure that you're using encryption and encrypt your snapshots so that if a snapshot is compromised somehow, it's not restorable without the proper keys in someone else's account. If you're using message queues, don't make them public. Especially don't make them public readable for sure. We've seen some instances where public writable is the design by default. But really, again, use encryption here. Don't allow unauthorized sources to read messages or any data from any data source, but that's specific to SQS. And then DynamoDB, this one's hard because this is a cloud native technology. Everything, even row level access, is built around IAM controls, and I think they may even have field level access. So again, IAM keeps coming back into all of this stuff. All right, so moving on, compute. So EC2 specifically, again for AWS, same old servers except different, right? Yes, no, I don't know, kind of. Yes, it's still a server. It is still a virtual server. It can be Ubuntu, it could be Windows, it could be Debian, you name it. But it's in a new environment. It's the same operating system, but it's in a new environment. So some of the attacks that you will see on EC2, it's the same stuff that we see on-prem. And so this gets into the area where people are like, okay, yeah, it's the cloud, but it's the same stuff. And especially once you start getting into compute, then very much so, yeah. So, you know, if we have a public-facing web server, the first thing we're going to do is, as you know, attackers, is enumerate services. You know, do port scanning, see what is configured to allow access to different services on that machine. Application exploits are extremely dangerous in the cloud. So this still is, you know, are your public-facing web applications, or even, you know, private, you know, or some kind of restricted web applications, how hardened are those applications from common attacks, and how much have you tested those, essentially? So SSRF and RCEs, so server-side request forgeries and remote code execution, are two of the biggest kind of things that you have to worry about. And then being knowledgeable about post exploitation. What are people going to do in this environment should they you know, breach, get a foothold somehow? So, and there's some new things to the cloud specifically that to keep in mind. You know, people are using resources to do cryptojacking. The instance metadata I'll talk a little bit about. Lateral movement, where can they go? What other services can they talk to? Can they access unencrypted data that's behind your perimeter, what have you? So, you know, just to, again, just kind of illustrate that this is, you know, using a tool like Showdown. This is just a simple web interface. I don't even need to know how to use Nmap or anything per se. I can just go quite simply put in EC2 into Showdown and get 43,000, almost 44,000 potential targets that are online, and will tell me what ports are listening on those. And so you can see, you know, this example that we won't call out who they are, but they, you know, that's a lot of services to have open to the public internet, right? And I mean, you have DNS, FTP, SSH, multiple web ports, you know, non-standard ports. I mean, that's a lot. And because every EC2 doesn't just get an IP address, it gets a DNS address. You know, it's not hard to find these things, and it's not hard to search for these things. Okay. So, you know, harden your servers just like you would any other time, right? The application exploits. So this is the headline that really kind of like dominated cloud security discussion for a lot of you know, the last year. Capital One had a massive breach. Yeah, I'm not going to go too much into it. I'm sure everybody's heard about it. But basically, what happened, that this is what we're talking about. This is specific to the cloud. Is that when you deploy an EC2 in AWS specifically, servers are given permissions, right? So not as a user, as a role. So role-based access is kind of the, you know, the identity model that we talk about, that's kind of unique to the cloud, or very prevalent. And so servers are given keys, and those keys are assigned IAM permissions. If those keys are given excessive permissions, then bad things can happen if those keys are compromised. So in the case of the Capital One exploit, you know, this is not a cloud exploit. This was an application exploit, right? And at least the initial foothold. And so they exploited an SSRF vulnerability. Were able to access that instance's metadata keys, and by grabbing those keys, they were then able to access 700 buckets, a single key pair, access key, secret access, or access ID and secret access key, were able to access 700 S3 buckets. That's very, very bad. And so, and these are buckets that they were configured to block public access. So a tool like Grey Hat Warfare or any kind of enumeration tool wouldn't have been able to access these. But one key, essentially for one server, should literally be able to access one bucket, or two or three, or buckets that are related to that application. That's still bad, but the the breadth of the damage done was very much due to excessive permissions and probably some lack of, obviously there was a exploit or a vulnerability in the application that was exploitable. And I don't know if this user had any kind of access. I don't know much about the application, but and then kind of looking at like, okay, say something is, a breach does occur, some kind of vulnerability is exploited. What are people going to do in the cloud that's specific to the cloud that's different than the data center? They're going to look for places to go and lateral movement. That's not unique to the cloud. What's unique to the cloud is where they can go, right? Everything's a service. You're not dealing with an actual server with installed software that that you built, and so it's different in that sense. Is that if those keys that are compromised have the ability to talk to other AWS services, then potentially they can access a database and again, it's that role-based access. So maybe they don't actually need a login credentials to access that. They could do cryptojacking, which is kind of, spin up a server in a different region that nobody's even paying attention to and sit there and mine crypto. They can set up persistence, that could be an IAM user that nobody even knows that's there that has a login now. And that could go undetected for quite some time. They could access, secured buckets and things like that. So again, SSRF and RCE are the big, bold red kind of letters here. And so as you're deploying applications, make sure that you're, that you have application security measures and testing in place, because that is, really the big target for getting inside the perimeter. And then you have cloud native tools like WAFs and things that you could very easily put in front of applications now. In my opinion, much easier than when you're managing on-prem infrastructure and have to set it up yourself. So that's some of the benefits of the cloud is security is actually pretty easy to deploy once you know it's there and once you know how to use it. But it can be fairly simple to set up. Some of the defenses for mitigating these attacks, server hardening. Just like any other server, follow your hardening best practices. Just because you're setting up network level security doesn't mean you shouldn't necessarily put a firewall on an Ubuntu server, right? Create user accounts on these servers. Don't share accounts. You wouldn't do that in an on-prem world. Don't do it in the cloud. Make sure that you're patching. Again, AWS is not going to make sure that a server that you deployed 4 years ago is up to date and currently patched. That's that shared security where it's your fault if you don't do it, quote unquote. It's still a server. Treat it like a server. Use load balancers and WAFs to kind of sit in front of your applications and take some of the work off of your hands. Encrypt volumes. Learn what that instance metadata that I talked about is and learn how to harden it. There's ways to harden version 1, which is in the past. Last year, they rolled out version 2, which, again, AWS is kind of doing their part to help, but it's still your responsibility to use version 2, understand version 2, and if you're using version 1, harden it or upgrade to version 2. Yeah. And then the last part, this is networking. I'm going to kind of go through this quickly. We'll try to get some to some Q&A. But yeah, so again, networking, it's the same old network except different, right? The same rules apply. You restrict access. You segment your networks. You hopefully monitor traffic and things like that. So networking is very hard. Anybody that has been around that job knows that. Networking in the cloud is also hard and different. So even somebody that's very experienced and knows at a very, very deep level the fundamentals of networking, it takes a little bit of time to learn how to do it effectively in a new environment with new controls, new settings, what have you. So, you know, some of these attacks, it's hard because these things start to intermingle. You know, attacks aren't done just on your VPC. You know, IAM, you know, kind of plays its part, what have you. But again, service discovery, what traffic are you allowing into your network? What, you know, from an external perimeter, what can somebody from the outside discover about where the pukas are in that network? Do you have controls that would prevent, you know, data exfiltration, or alert you of that? A lot of, again, the defaults, a lot of the defaults that you'll see out of the gate for networking controls are very, very permissive. For example, all outbound traffic, like any rule that you set up in AWS, the default is allow all outbound traffic to the public internet. And sometimes that's okay, but it should be checked, right? It should be a deliberate decision that that's what we want. Lateral movement, you know, how you're setting up your networks. If somebody does get a foothold, where can they go? Can they jump to a different VPC? Do they have, you know, do you have a VPN set up where they could potentially, you know, traverse from, you know, on-prem to the cloud, or vice versa, cloud to on-prem? Can they set up a security group backdoor, which would allow them, you know, to continue to access your network? Or they could set up traffic monitoring. You know, you can, this is another thing, is a lot of people don't secure their traffic on internal networks. A lot of it's HTTP traffic between services because we're used to hardening the perimeter. And so it's kind of easy to set stuff up to monitor that traffic. And if it's in plain text, you know, everybody knows kind of what that means. And so I don't have a lot of slides, visuals for this one, because like I said, it's part of an attack. It's not an attack itself. So everything that I probably showed before this has some part of VPC and network configuration as part of it. Even the S3 stuff, it has network controls as well. So, you know, again, follow your best practices. Migrate your entire, you know, IT security practice, not just your applications. Don't just throw your applications in the cloud and say we're in the cloud. So, you know, do network segmentation, create very strict security group and network ACL rules. You know, I should say deliberate in addition to strict. You know, sometimes you don't need strict, but you should have deliberate. You know, assign security group rules to other internal security groups. That's something I think that's a little bit new. You're used to providing access to IP ranges and but you don't always control IPs in the cloud. So what you can do is assign access to other security groups that you do control. And if you're not familiar with security groups, that may not really resonate. But again, these are just baseline rules. As you're going into this environment, you should get familiar with that and understand what that means. VPC endpoints, I think this is something else that's not widely known, is that for internal traffic, if you talk to other AWS services, by default, that traffic goes out to the public internet. It may be encrypted, it may be over HTTPS, but it's still leaving your quote-unquote network. You can set up VPC endpoints to talk to different services and keep all of that traffic internal to, you know, AWS's infrastructure or your vendor, your cloud vendor's infrastructure, whatever it may be. So helpful hits. You know, I didn't know that for a long time after you know, kind of setting up applications and network infrastructure in AWS. Okay, so how do we manage this, right? And I'll kind of reinforce, you know, the concept. You know, migrate your practices, not just your applications. So anything that you're doing on-prem, there's a cloud solution, aka, you know, cloud variant, or, you know, you can even use existing tools deployed in the cloud. But anything that you're going to do in an on-prem environment, you should be doing in the cloud. with the exception of physical security at the data center, right? That's their job. Everything else is your job. So really, think about what you have in place and figure out what the alternate, the options are as you migrate to the cloud. And really, because of the complexity of the environment, like I mentioned, if you're, I shouldn't even say, not if, the goal should be automation. Automation is really the only way to effectively manage the cloud. And because, again, it's all configuration. It's so tedious and so much to account for. And it's so easy to not have visibility of something that is misconfigured. So, we have the tools now where you can automate everything. It takes a little bit of investment up front, but it pays in dividends over time. You can have, code reviews, you can have peer reviews, you can, put a lot of, you can actually automate remediation now, which is pretty cool, is that if something, if an event is detected, everything is events. There's just events everywhere. That's the whole, it's all API driven everything. So you can actually detect an event and automate remediation rather than just sending alert and having somebody manually having to respond to, pager duty at 3 o'clock in the morning. Still perform vulnerability scanning, it's still infrastructure. So, so really, leverage the tools that are out there. There's a lot, and it's pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff. Yeah, and if you don't have like DevSecOps, security engineering, and again, these are kind of buzzwords, but you should have some people within your org that kind of take this on and really own it and try to implement some of these newer practices. I'll share this. This is a cloud security model. I'm not going to read through this for everybody, but you'll see there's kind of different levels from kind of where most people start off with no automation all the way to automation everywhere. And if you can get to level 5, you're doing very, very, very well in the area of cloud security. And some people may never get to level 5 practically, but it's a goal, right? Other things that I won't get into today, but things that you should be thinking about, organizations, you can kind of, reduce your attack surface by segmenting your actual AWS accounts. Get to know some of the cloud native security tools. There are really good tools that are developed, but there's a learning curve. So you have to learn about them and learn how to implement them. Perform asset management, again, something that you would do normally. But again, this is all virtualized. Everything is virtualized. And so it's very hard to track virtual resources that go beyond servers. It's not all just about servers and hardware anymore. Do training. Do this early. Do it often. Do it all the time. Create a culture.
Live streaming is on.
Hey.
Okay, it looks like we are live again. Apologies, technical issue. But yeah, I think you were on the last slide, right, Jason? Do you want to finish off? And just a reminder that there are questions coming up to you please make sure you answer them. And yeah, I will ask the audience to submit more questions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So yeah, this is the last slide, and then I'll get to some questions. So I was just kind of emphasizing, the importance of training. Train all your people, train everybody. I can't say enough about that. It is an investment that will pay off every time. And then lastly, humble brag for OccamSec. Continue to do pen testing with, it's what we do. There is some differences in the cloud environment. There's many similarities to an on-prem environment, but you should still be performing, checks and balances and hardening through external, third parties as well. So that's it. That's my presentation. If OccamSec can help you in any of this, please reach out. You can reach out to us on Twitter, LinkedIn, or by email. And yeah, I'll get to some questions now. Okay, first question: how do you solve the problem? AWS IAM now has a lot of tools for free. that will analyze your policies and tell you where you have given too many permissions that are not being used. My answer to that question is absolutely use them. They are very good. There's a new tool that just came out of Salesforce that's called Cloud-splaining. So it's kind of a funny name, but I actually worked with the guy on when he was designing that randomly through a Slack channel. But that's a very good tool. There's Parliament is built by a guy named Scott Piper. That's a very, very good tool. There's a bunch of them. Those are the two that come to mind. Or Policy Sentry. I'm sorry. There's another one. 3. Policy Sentry. Those 3 tools, in terms of analyzing IAM specifically, are really good places to start. And so if maybe I can throw these in the slides when we share them or something. But yeah, check those out. Definitely use them. They're better than anything AWS is going to give you for sure. And the Cloud-splaining will actually show you like what permissions you're susceptible to, what kind of attacks like privilege escalation, resource tampering, etc. So check those out. Next question, how much has PPS, packets per second, been an issue in protecting the cloud? A scenario, fooling the load balancer to get where you want with a PPS kick. I'm not super familiar with that attack method. What I do know is that AWS specifically, their infrastructure, they have quite a lot that you can put in front of your applications that are meant to mitigate, DDoS and a lot of those external facing kind of like network attacks. So they have a cloud WAF. They have cloud, I'm losing my words, CloudFront, which is kind of like a CDN distribution that can sit in front of your applications that will mitigate DDoS attacks and some of these other external attacks. There's still research coming out. People figure out WAF bypasses, and again, the good thing about one of the benefits about the cloud is that when the vendor fixes something, it's fixed for everybody. You don't have to patch something. You don't have to know about the fix. It's just fixed unless they roll out a new version, and that's actually very helpful. So, that's some of the benefits of the cloud is they do help in some areas. But again, you have to enable these things. You have to use them. If you just put an EC2 server on the public internet, then you're not going to have any of these protections. So, and the load balancers. I mean, the question was specifically about load balancers, and they also have their cloud-specific load balancers. So I would say use them. Look at those products, and you might have a better, deeper answer to that question than I can provide. I am new to cloud security. Any suggestion for securing AWS Lightsail and Node.js? My suggestion would be if you're using Lightsail, you're not getting a lot of the protections of the cloud. Lightsail was basically like a direct competition for services like DigitalOcean, where it's just very, very cheap and easy to set up a virtual server, but you get almost no controls to help you out in terms of network controls, load balancers, WAFs, all that kind of stuff. So if you're using Lightsail, you have to set all of that stuff up on the server yourself. You have to install your own firewall. You have to install, any kind of stuff. So Lightsail is a very easy way to get started, but if you're doing like production level work for a company that has, resources that need protecting, I would recommend not using Lightsail and learn, to the best of your ability. Again, it's hard. I'm not saying this is easy, but get to learn EC2 and using like the load balancers and things like that and VPCs to protect your application more holistically. Question, how do hybrid orgs manage and or sync access management tools? That's a great question. That's a very deep question. Single sign-on, federated access is the most generic answer to that question. Is that you can use Azure AD to access AWS. You can use Azure completely. AWS is just the vendor I'm focused on for this talk. But if you use Active Directory on-prem, which most of you probably do, you can sync up with Azure AD and can control permission to all kinds of different, software as a service, infrastructure as a service products. So you can completely, manage control from Azure AD. Amazon themselves just rolled out a single sign-on implementation. So there's definitely tools out there for hybrid organizations, but there's a lot of them. I think that's one of the hard parts, is figuring out the right solution for you, and that's and kind of navigating through all of the marketing BS that's out there, and really identifying a solution that works for you. But yeah, I think that's the quick answer to that. The solutions exist. You have to, find the right tool for the job. And I believe that's all the questions, and we want to probably do some transition between the panel. Definitely, I'm looking forward to the panel. These are several of my coworkers that blow my mind all the time with how good they are at what they do. So I'm looking forward to the next panel, and I hope you are too. But that's it for me. So thank you for your time, and yeah, reach out to us if you have any questions. We're always happy to help. Aloha.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jason. I think it's been a fantastic talk, and we had quite a few questions from the audience as well. So I think we're just going to move on to the Pentester panel in a minute. I'm just going to share the screen with the Pentester names and quickly introduce them. Just give me a second. I need to. Okay, everyone. So the next part of our event is going to be Meet the Pentesters panel. We have 3 pentesters tonight with us: Casey Mahon, Ivana Bianco, and Nicholas Donarski. So I'm going to quickly introduce them. So Casey has about 9 years of experience of information security. She originally graduated in fine art and then transitioned to information security. So it would be good to find out how she managed to achieve this, and moved on to achieve certifications such as Security Plus and OSCP. And currently she's leading the a variety of offensive engagements in both cybersecurity and physical security, which is kind of interesting. So she specializes in finding crucial fault points in organizations' infrastructure, while also adapting to the ever-changing demands of the clients she works with. Our next pentester on the panel is Ivano Bianco. So Ivano is Italian with a fake Russian accent. So he started using computers at the age of 11, and by the age of 14, he switched from basic to assembly and started circumventing stuff like copy protection for fun. Yeah, and now spent the next 20 years in IT ops and used to be called IT security engineer and DevOps engineer. So nowadays he focuses on penetration testing, web application testing, because he enjoys breaking things. He thinks it's always fun. Some other stuff that Ivano does is threat hunting and security awareness training. And he still likes to figure out why a server is down, but he will not come and fix your computer. And our third pentester is Nicholas. Nicholas has been a pioneer in information security for the past 20 years. He works with various clients in federal, state, and local government and enterprises of all sizes. He is well recognized in the international community as a senior authority on pen testing strategy, operations, tools, and training. And again, apart from web and application security, he's also focusing on compliance, high threat physical security, and red team operations. And recently, he was focused on development of security architecture and development around things like machine learning and artificial narrow intelligence. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to the panel now, and our moderator, Andra, I believe will have some questions for the panel.
Thanks, Sam. Cool. That was a really good introduction for everyone. I think a good first question for all three pen testers would be, how did you become a pen tester? Quick.
Shall we start with Casey?
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, I couldn't unmute. So how I kind of got started in this, I was originally completely self-taught. As my bio dictated, I originally went to school for fine art, and I did graphic design for a while, and then from there I transitioned, and then I was a tattoo artist for about 10 years. And then kind of in my free time, just because I was kind of getting tired of that industry, I started studying information security on my own. I ended up getting my Security Plus certificate, as well as getting my OSCP about a year later. And then from there, I managed to get a job with Acomsec, and that's kind of where I am right now.
Nice. That's pretty cool. Thank you. Ivano?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Fantastic. I took a very long path because I worked as a systems administrator, systems engineer, and I was taking a look at logs and see that people were trying to break into my systems, and this spawned my interest for security. And so I would say that I always dealt with security, but not with the right job title. So I became an auditor first. I was doing PCI DSS audits, which is a fantastic job to learn how to deal with people, how different companies implemented the same security requirements. And then I ended up being a pen tester full-time here with Occamsec, despite the fact that I've always been dealing with the offensive or defensive security throughout my career. I hope it makes sense.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you. And Nick?
You're welcome.
I was born into this, and I say this in kind of jest, but I was born in '82, and in '84, I was really learning my ABCs and 1, 2, 3s on a Muppet keyboard back on an Apple IIe, and really been around technology pretty much all my life. You know, I thank my pops for really being the nerd that he was back in the day. But started doing computer stuff all through my life, and did my first pen test in 1999. I actually did Y2K testing. And then from there went into forensics and started working with a lot of different organizations. Finally, you know, kind of found my space in the early 2000s in security. Was kind of forced to try to get some kind of certificate. So I took the CISSP and slept through the exam. And then from there, got my CEH and started over at Rapid7. I was part of their professional services team early on. Was part of the HP Shadow Labs throughout the lifespan of that, and then I found my space. You know, continuing to focus on really kind of breaking stuff as long as I've been doing this. So that's how I got through this whole thing.
Nice. Thank you very much. Okay, so related to that, I know I've heard about a whole range of experiences and backgrounds. What do you guys think is the top skill that you would need to be a good pen tester? Being able to break things? I don't know. That's just something that comes to mind. Drive,
just trying to go out there and find something, and whatever the nerd or whatever the geek technology that you're in is really just focusing your time into trying to be good at it, understanding it at its lowest level. Because no matter where you go in this industry, the tech is the one common denominator. The drive or the focus or whatever it is on that is what makes every person in the industry different.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Ivano, Case, any other skills ideas?
Case, please go ahead.
Sure. So, I mean, like necessary skills in the industry, just in general, I think people just kind of need to do more. Like, I mean, there is, I think, a lot of penetration testers, that will just run a vulnerability scan and then just verify what comes back from that. And I think some of the necessary skills is that, like, as pen testers, they just need to do more, right? They need to look more in depth into areas and find more complex issues that something that an automated tool or scanner might not be able to find. So that means, having to manually attempt to insert malicious code into inputs, doing any sort of manual tampering with a cookie or header values and so on and so forth. So it's just, I think a lot of pen testers just need to do more and not rely so much on tools.
Okay, that's useful. Thank you. Ivano?
I would say the top skill for me would be curiosity. So the drive, the desire to understand how things work. And then also creativity, because you need to try different things. And this could be very, very, very simple or very uncommon. And then lots of patience and perseverance. And once you have this, you will end up with some data that you will have to handle and correlate together. So the creativity part then will probably give you an epiphany of how to approach a certain target. But curiosity to me is the top skill.
That's perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, this is very interesting for me to hear. I'm pretty sure that the people watching are also trying to get into this area. So yeah, it's useful. Related to this, what do you think are the main languages that someone should learn in order to be a good pen tester?
Well, I'm old, so I have a preference for bash scripting, especially which is useful if you are doing penetration testing on Linux systems or Unix systems in general. If you focus mainly on Windows systems, it could be beneficial to learn some PowerShell. And when it comes to writing proof of concept as a, let's say, general purpose language, I would suggest people to learn Python, simply because, well, it's a simple language to learn, and then most of the proof of concept that I see nowadays are written in Python. So even if you don't know how to write code from scratch, at least having the ability of reading Python code could be beneficial, because you could take a look at the proof of concept and then say, hey, I can do this manually with another tool. Or, hey, I can use this piece of code to write another proof of concept for a similar software that I'm trying to break into. So Bash, PowerShell, Python to me, and then everything else. And that's the curiosity to go back to the being curious.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. I mean, the lower level kind of core PowerShell, Bash are going to be the keys to just understanding kind of that interaction with the OS, because at the end of the day, that's where you're trying to get to. But familiarity with everything and anything, you can get further in this by being able to read code than necessarily being able to write code. The writing code, as you mature and as you go through your time as a tester, you'll build those skills, and you'll be able to figure out the things that you see yourself doing time after time that you can automate and you can put into Python, Ruby, whatever flavor you decide is really kind of comfortable for you. But really kind of as you start off, being able to understand kind of the structures and the standards that you see everywhere, the if this then that statements and how the flow of things work. will at least get you that leg up on somebody that necessarily has no experience with code.
I see.
Yep.
Okay.
And I agree with both of what my colleagues are saying. And even going further, even older languages, say, for example, like C or C++, are also helpful. Just in the case of, there was a couple of assessments actually that I was on, in which case, when you're working with stuff where at the same time you also have to bypass any sort of like antivirus implementation or any type of endpoint security, knowing this and knowing some of the more low level stuff that Nick was talking about, is helpful, not necessarily for, during the initial AppSec end, but what happens kind of after, during your post exploitation methodologies. But overall, as far as I'm concerned, anything and everything, like if you don't know a language and if you just find it interesting, then you should learn it. Like, it's as simple as that. And the more technology you're exposed to, it's more likely that you're going to be exposed to more and more languages as well. So yes, I mean, what Ivano and Nick have been saying, those are like more or less the primary languages, but it shouldn't just stop there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. Perfect. Well, I think there are a few questions in the channel as well. So I'll go with what was your favorite engagement and why? So what was the favorite assessment? And related to that, what was the coolest vulnerability that you found? We can start with Case.
So this is actually a hard question because I don't really have a favorite, and I have a lot of moments where I've enjoyed actually like making and doing some damage, so to speak. So I'll describe one time. It was actually a recent assessment actually, and this was a streaming application, and what ended up happening, and this also just goes into what Jason was saying during his presentation about AppSec misconfigurations, right? So this server was misconfigured in a way that allows me to see fairly verbose debug output for any sort of error messages. So, for example, 404s, 401s, and so on and so forth. And in one of these messages, it gave the exact location in order to export all the user activity logs. And now, as a logged in user, normally in this application, you could log in and see these activity logs, but there's extra information in the logs when you actually download them, in which case it contains information on user activity plus their session cookies, which allowed us to steal all these session cookies. And then we were able to replay them and then essentially masquerade as any one of these users. And what ended up happening was that some of these users were engineering staff that had extra privileges than I think even the admin users, that allowed us to actually get to the underlying server configuration, which also contained stored credentials for their company-wide SSO solution. So it actually resulted in being worse than what the initial vulnerability actually was. So I thought that one was pretty cool.
How do you get to like tie these things up and find something that's bigger than you thought in the beginning? How do you even follow the line of thought for that?
So at least with this one, I don't go into expecting that I'm going to find X, Y, Z. It's more I'm kind of following the breadcrumbs and kind of seeing where they lead me. And in this case, once I got access to their super admin panel, it had all the credentials for their SSO implementation, and it was just a mess.
That's interesting. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Nick? I saw you smiling at the beginning, so you must have got an idea of a favorite engagement or assessment or something.
I've had a lot of fun ones across my time. Me particularly, I absolutely love being able to do like the real red team stuff, doing like the physical integrated security, use technology as part of the whole physical break and like really kind of what the mentality goes. So probably my favorite of all times. I was doing some work for a client in New York, and they had a big flagship, big retail store and everything. They're real touchy about their security, physical security, all the rest. The whole thing started where as you're doing your OSINT, you're starting to understand kind of the building and everything going on there. Well, we actually found the entire list of all their technical connections, all of their demarcs, along with the notations of where their VIP showing rooms were, from a realtor who was trying to rent this place out after the client left or before they were in there. It would have been after, but yeah, had all of this detail in there. And the best part of this whole thing was playing with kind of the things that people see as normal and kind of messing with people's minds. So one of the days I actually put on some dirty clothes, put in some dirty laundry in a bag, grabbed myself a Starbucks and laid out on a bench in the middle of New York City while I was actually keeping track of what their security guys were doing, how they handled where they came, when they took breaks and all the rest. So that was probably one of the most fun, is just because I love actually getting out there and playing with people as much as I like the technology.
That's pretty cool. Nice. Thank you. Ivano?
So I didn't do much physical security as Nick did, but what I remember in one engagement, I started to do something very simple to see if I could list files in a folder in a website, and the website was loading some files from /misc/include. So think about website.com/misc/some function.javascript. And then I removed the name of the file, and the server was not properly configured. So I got a listing of all the files in this folder. And one of the text files contained the password for the FTP server so that I could actually load my own files web server. And then I managed to upload a reverse shell, which gave me access as the web server user onto that server. And then I started to see if I could escalate my privilege, becoming root basically, and owned the whole server. And I managed to do that because they had some binaries that were not supposed to be there, nmap specifically, and I leveraged nmap to become root. And then once I became root, I added myself as a user, and I added myself as a sudoer so that I could run root commands as well. So not as exciting as getting into a building or dressing up as an elevator technician, but still very, very satisfying when you succeed into owning the whole server for yourself.
Definitely. That's pretty cool. Well, my story for physical security, I didn't do it, but I had that, for my team, we got tested, was by Santa and an elf. And I thought that was fun. They gave chocolate to everyone and they got in. Cool.
No USB sticks for Christmas?
No, just chocolate. That was an interesting one. Okay, so I see that there are quite a few questions in YouTube, and we had one about certifications as well. I know we spoke about skills at the beginning, but I'd like to jump back just a bit. So people are curious about the certifications that you think would be very useful to get in order to become a pen tester. And do you think these certifications are needed before so you can get a job? So yeah, what do you think? I know that there's the OSCP, but yeah,
well,
a bunch of other stuff.
So I would say it's a difficult topic, and it can be also a catch-22 situation. I personally believe in education, not certifications. So for instance, I went through the official Cisco training in class many years ago, but I never had the time to actually certify as a network engineer at the time. But I still remember the things that I learned into that Cisco class. So to me, it's better to get the training and the certification. You may need it, you may not need it. Now, I understand that certification are a way to get past gatekeepers, so people from HR, basically. And if that's your goal, because you're looking for a job, I would suggest starting with a certified ethical hacker certification, which could be a starting point just to get past HR and get an interview. On the other hand, if you're already working in the field, you don't need a certification because you're already working in the field. But the education, the training could still be beneficial. And personally, I think that the certifications that are the most valuable are the ones where you need to show some practical knowledge. Casey mentioned OSCP. That would be my favorite one. Because otherwise, with many certifications, people could just memorize the answers to the exam, but then when you actually ask them relevant questions, they don't have the experience or the creativity or the mindset to actually do the technical work. So it's again, it's a catch-22 situation. You need a certification maybe to get a job, but if you have a job, you don't need a certification.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Ivano has been saying, and that, like, yes, unfortunately, there is a kind of, like, if you're fresh out of school, if you went for information security, or if you have a computer science degree, having, one of these certs to essentially just get past the HR manager, would definitely be helpful. I mean, like, my personal opinion is that, like, someone should not look for like doing like a million certs at once. I think they should pick just like one overall basic cert, and then I highly recommend it looks better with any sort of like hands-on certification, so like the OSCP and things like that. And this is mostly when you're dealing with like HR managers and people that aren't really that technical, that are just screening just based on the resume alone. And this is an unfortunate reality, is that they're going to look at the education and the certs, and then based on that, they're going to put it in the pass or reject pile, right? To go into a phone screening, but anything hands-on I think is good. And then if you have something like Security Plus, which I think is still fairly cheap and fairly easy to get, like definitely looks good, especially if you pair it with a computer science degree or a similar route of education. But after that, it's really going to rely on the phone screen, and I would hope that the people doing these phone screens are going to be judging applicants based on their performance in the interview and what's in their head, as opposed to what they have on paper, because that's kind of how you find better pen testers in this industry, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, definitely, it's a very hands-on job. So
yeah, and honestly, it's about really putting a team together too, that you're going to have people that have different focuses in different technologies and things like that. So I'll echo everything that everybody said on the panel. Certification really is that foot in the door. If you're in the industry, or if you're spending time somewhere, it's not as important as when you're trying to get into the industry, especially now. But when you're talking about building a team, I'd much rather have a specialist in fiber optic networking, and a specialist in web apps, and a specialist in forensics than I would necessarily want those three people having a broad spectrum of only limited knowledge. It's really about building that team, finding whatever, again, that niche, something in technology made you have fun with this. And if you have to do this for the next 40 years of your life, you might as well have fun with this. So, if it's network, if it's coding, if it's IoT, whatever it is, security, it applies to everything that we touch and interact with and do in our lives today. That if it's apps, if it's mobile, if it's whatever it may be, thermostats at this point. I mean, the future is going to be IoT toilets. You know, whatever it is in technology that makes you have fun, there's a security aspect of that. And there's an organization out there that is willing to have that kind of team focus, or that person on their team. And if you have a passion for it and you have the idea of security, being able to put the paper down and getting past that HR, it can be a hurdle. Go out and be part of your community. Go out and be part of OWASP. Go out and be part of B-Sides. Go out and talk to people and do stuff and play with things. That's going to get you to a happy place in the industry, as opposed to being a scan monkey for the rest of your life.
That's really cool.
Sorry for interrupting. I'd like to add something very important, in my opinion. If you Google, how to get into security, how to get into penetration testing, people will tell you, oh, you need to study this and this and this, and they'll give you a list of books. Now, most of the material that you can find online, it's free, which is a very good plus compared to 20 years ago. But very few people mention that you also need to find a hiring manager who can understand that you have the passion to be in this line of work, and the line manager who understands, for instance, that there is a huge overlap between systems administration and security, networking and security, and who can actually accept the fact that these are transferable skills. So what I'm saying is that don't focus just on learning and looking for a job. Also, go out there, as Nick mentioned, talk with people, go to conferences, go to meetups, and just speak with other people who has the same passion as you. And that could lead to actually getting a job without having to go through HR, without having to deal with a manager who doesn't understand that if you don't remember something, it's okay to actually Google for the answer. And I remember many years ago, I went through a couple of interviews, and I was rejected once because I didn't remember that a specific switch of a Unix command. And I said, yeah, manager, I have a high respect for the people who wrote the documentation, and I'm sure that if I do man name of the command, I can actually see what the switch is. And a second time I was rejected because I was not in the eyes of the hiring manager capable of remembering all the switches of LVM, which is a mechanism that allows you to manage storage under Linux. And we were discussing about automation, and I told this guy, hey, I've been automating the deployment of hundreds of servers, so LVM to me is just an abstraction. So I automate the process, and I don't have to actually look at the tool or the switches. And the guy said, but I expect you, to work with the drives every single day, when I actually would work manually with that specific tool maybe once a year. So having a hiring manager who is not inflexible, it's a big thing.
Yeah.
And that's end of the ramble. It's an Italian thing.
No problem. It's really interesting, and I think what you guys mentioned also answered one of the other questions that we had about what kind of non-technical skills you need. So obviously you said, curiosity, being able to network, being able to speak to people, to show what you can do, not what you can learn by heart. So yeah, cool. There's another interesting question here. It's about pen testing and vulnerability scans. So the question is, what's the main difference, and what should people do and why? Related to automation as well, obviously.
Right. So
Case?
I can start. So the difference between a pen test and a vulnerability scan is that the vulnerability assessment is that someone is just going to be running something like Nessus, Qualys, what have you, and then they're just going in and just verifying the issues. Whereas the pen test is actually just supposed to you're actually supposed to be simulating, an actual bad actor within whatever environment that you're trying to test. So you actually need to go deeper and do the involved work and try and kind of mimic what a bad actor would do. So, I mean, that might mean being more stealthy in the environment. So doing things like hiding your tracks, not running any like loud scanners, not running any excessively loud tools of any kind, and just trying to within like, because most assessments have a very limited window of actual active testing, so you kind of have to do all this kind of intricate work in a very small amount of time. But the payoff with that is that the client is actually going to get a more realistic risk to their assets that they are going to be able to see and make actually helpful recommendations insofar as preventing, these various types of attacks against all these environments.
Okay. Nick?
Sure. I mean, they both have their value, right? When you're talking about vulnerability assessment, when you're talking about pen testing, as kind of the business requirement of information security at this point, penetration testing is always going to be, like Kay said, it's going to be trying to replicate what that real world attacker would do, trying to get to the keys to the kingdom, the crown jewels, whatever have you, at the other side or at the inside of the environment. Vulnerability assessment is more of a broader tool set, looking for like that low-hanging fruit, those types of things. But if you're doing, say, a lot of application development, you're putting out applications and revisions very quickly, an application scanner might be able to get you at least to an awareness point of what is happening as those revisions take place, as you have a code change take place and things like that. Plus, as being a professional pen tester, we have to abide by a scope time. We have to have a report done. We have to have a lot of things that we account for when we're doing our actual test. So leveraging things like a vulnerability assessment tool, a scanner, what have you, to kind of get those low-hanging fruit things done, and then take that, either build on that or at least say these things I know are done, and then we can take that manual step to really kind of get into the deeper sections during like a pen test. They both have their place. It really depends on what the organization is looking to get out of it, what type of security questions that they're trying to answer. And the right answer is just really dependent upon what the goal of it is.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I suppose that something like an automated scan would be one of the top 5 things that you do when you start a pen test, because one of the questions is, do you have a top 5 Voltron or vulns or things that you look for right off the bat when starting a pen test?
I mean, process-wise, yeah, you're especially, again, we as professional pen testers have a finite amount of time we can spend on this. The bad guys, they can spend as much time as they want. They don't get paid until they succeed. Whereas we have 401ks and we have, all of those fun, real work type of scenarios and meetings and Zoom calls and all the rest that we have to deal with, as well as making sure that we get these things in. Those are the types of things that really you have to leverage your tool set to help you build your tool set. But like Kay said earlier, don't be a tool. You want to be better than your tool set. You want to use them where they should be, but you don't want to only be as good as those tools. So vuln scanning, yeah, you do as part of that initial kickstart to kind of help you accelerate the ability to make coverage and do all of the process and procedure things. But again, you don't want to be only as good as the tools that you're using.
Definitely. Any other things that you would start with, for example, when you do a web app pen test? Like the very first thing that you would look at?
So with a web app pen test, specifically, that's really just going to depend on the app itself. But the first thing I usually do, I usually do a quick functional test. I try and map out the application. I try and figure out where all the inputs are, what software and libraries that it's running, and try and fingerprint as many of them as I can. And then I'll take a look through the source code and see if there's any obvious bugs there. And then from there, I'll start fuzzing inputs. I'll start looking at any sort of DOM objects, especially if there's anything being stored in the client. I'll look at cookies. I'll look at host headers, and probably most important of all is that I'll look at any sort of authentication, as well as the various requests being kind of communicated back and forth. And this is also in addition to any sort of APIs that they have running in the background, or just generally what their backend looks like, and then try and formulate kind of the various areas within the application. So just getting as comprehensive as a sitemap as humanly possible. And those are only first steps. So
yeah. Thank you. Ivana?
Well, in addition to what Case does, I always try to find logical errors in a web application, things that the developer did not think about, something that usually could happen, often. Let's say that you are in a portal, and this is a real-world example because a friend of mine had her website compromised like this. She wrote a portal for, let's say, friends and family. People could register and then upload an avatar image. But she didn't put many checks in place. So at a certain point in the morning, she said, oh my God, somebody hacked my website. Now I have some kind of Illuminati video that plays automatically. What happened? So what happened was that the hacker registered an account on the portal, and then they uploaded a piece of PHP instead of an image. And then they were able to understand where this piece of PHP was uploaded because the location was fixed. And then they just called the PHP code, which contained a shell. So the hackers basically gained total access to the server simply because of a failed upload facility. And this is something that happens also in commercial grade software, more often than not. And so I try to look for this kind of logical errors. And sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. Worst case scenario, you always rely on the infrastructure part. So maybe it's the web application. So maybe it's the web server rather than the web application, the entry point. Or maybe there is something else. Maybe you could run a phishing campaign and actually steal the credentials of an administrator. So again, we go into the realm of creativity, as mentioned before.
Thank you very much.
You're right, but there is no silver bullet. That's the most important part.
Yeah. Another question based on this, I think it's related. Do you keep finding the same issues? Are there any prevalent issues that you keep finding in most of your assessments?
I would say yes. From a general security point of view, I keep finding unpatched operating systems, obsolete operating systems, or third-party libraries which are still obsolete. So maybe somebody could develop a web application in, let's say, 2012 and use the third-party libraries that are available in 2012. But then the company doesn't have proper policies and processes to keep this web application updated. And 8 years later, you still see the very same third-party libraries in use. And then maybe you research what kind of vulnerabilities they are affected by, and then you could actually find your entry point. So usually lack of patching, lack of security awareness, lack of internal processes and procedures, it's the issue that I see the most in my experience.
What about you,
Yeah,
Jay?
and on my end, like, yeah, so I too also see that a lot, but on in a much simpler terms, like the things I see the most, like, I mean, things like default passwords for various pieces of software. I see that quite a bit. A lot of websites will not have properly directory indexing, meaning that that they have their directory structure on their web server completely open, and I'm able to just navigate through it, and just a whole and just multiple misconfiguration issues I always see all the time, outside of any like outright vulnerabilities. It's more just I see more misconfigurations more than anything else, I should say.
Yeah. Nick?
Yeah, I agree there as well. You know, it really kind of goes into the fact that sorry, I literally just spaced. You know, putting time into understanding what's going on. I apologize. I just had a brain fart. Can you repeat the question for me?
It
Ivana,
was
what were we
about whether you keep finding the same issues.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so along with Ivano and Case, yeah, you really kind of see the same issues, and the kind of the weakest link that I see in really the core of overtime is the human element, the deployment. Like Jason was saying earlier in his talk, really the deployment is where the biggest issue is. That human element is kind of no matter what, until you can get that out, until the system really understands what's going on. There's always going to be someone that wants to maintain control, wants to have their hands on it, what have you, and that's really going to be the biggest thing that I've seen over time is, you know, the same types of old systems being online, like Ivano said, the same types of issues where it's deployment over time. But again, it comes down to really the human element in it is really the biggest thing that you see continued throughout.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think we just have about 7 minutes left until we get disconnected again from the stream. So towards the end of the question list, there's one interesting one from my perspective. Is what's your favorite hacker movie? Just to end on a happier note.
So I tend to like bad hacker movies. So, but just growing up, since I was a '90s kid, Hackers was like my go-to. I love war games. I love sneakers, but you know, at the end of the day, I kind of just want to see something bad and laugh about it. So that's kind of my go-to. And then with a second maybe being Swordfish, because that's just hilarious.
My God, it's exactly my same my same answer to the question. I mean, Hugh Jackman doing hand clap while he was trying to guess passwords was unbelievable. Also, whole guy had some special skills. I would say yes, war games and sneakers, but simply because sneakers to me it's more of a realistic movie. But again, you know, hand clapping, midair.
War Games by far is my absolute favorite one. That was, yes, being as young as I was when you know, the whole Whopper and being able, just the way that it was pulled off, by far favorite hacker movie. Whopper over Gibson any day.
These are really interesting titles. I haven't heard of any of them. This is really bad because I work in security. I should technically know this. Okay, well, I think all of these yeah, okay, so I don't think we have any time for more questions, but this has been really, really interesting. I work in application security. I know that other people maybe are trying to get into the security field, but I've learned a lot from you guys. Thank you very much. And I'll pass it on to Sam now for the final slides. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. I would like to thank all the pen testers and Jason for speaking to us at this event. I think it's been absolutely fantastic. Hopefully we'll be back with more events soon. So in order to make sure you don't miss the next event, I'm going to show the contact details for both the OWASP London and OWASP Suffolk chapter. Just give me a second so I can share this. Okay, I think you should be able to see my screen now.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, so this is the information how to contact OWASP Suffolk chapter. They have a web page which is on owasp.org www.chapter Suffolk. Also a page on Meetup. OWASP Suffolk is on Twitter. OWASP Suffolk is the Twitter handle there. Also, we have a Slack. OWASP has a an organizational Slack. There's information how to join it. You can find it on OWASP website. And each chapter has its own channel. So Suffolk chapter can be found under chapter-Suffolk channel. And OWASP Suffolk also has a YouTube channel, but unfortunately they haven't got enough subscribers to have their own short handle like we do. So please, everyone, can you please find OWASP Suffolk chapter and subscribe? Because if the chapter manages to get 100 subscribers, they will be able to have a nice looking URL instead of a long random one. Here's the information how you can keep in touch with OWASP London chapter. We are also on Twitter, also on Facebook, also have a channel on Slack, on Meetup. You can find us OWASP London. Of course, you're watching us now on YouTube under OWASP London channel. We're also on LinkedIn. So if you're on LinkedIn, you can find OWASP London as an organization and follow us there to make sure you don't miss the next event and follow all our news. I would like to thank everyone and would like to remind everyone that video recordings will be available on OWASP London and OWASP Suffolk YouTube channels. And Jason Sewell slides will be shared on OWASP London and OWASP Suffolk web pages, and the web pages are being showed on screen right now. So thank you everyone and hope to see you soon online. Thank you all.
Thank you.